Welcome back to Bible Shorts, episode 122, Paul in Athens. When we left off last week, the Apostle Paul, Silas, and Timothy had been sharing the good news of Jesus in a town called Berea in Macedonia. But then, once again, some people became believers in Jesus as the Messiah, but others did not. When he was threatened again, Paul had to leave and ended up in southern Greece in Athens, while Silas and Timothy stayed behind. And the believers who escorted Paul to Athens left with instructions from Paul for Silas and Timothy to join him as soon as possible. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the Jewish synagogue with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happened to be there. A group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with Paul. Some of them asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" Others remarked, "He seems to be advocating foreign gods." They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and his resurrection. Then they took Paul and brought him to a meeting of the OPPC, a hilltop where philosophers debated, but also a place where city officials held trials for murder and crimes against public order. They said to him, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? You are bringing some strange ideas to our ears. We would like to know what they mean." Specifically, they seem to think he's been teaching about two strange gods named Healer and Resurrection. Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship, and this is what I'm going to proclaim to you." Paul goes on and says, "The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by human hands. And he does not need to be served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. God did this so that we would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being." As some of your own poets have said, we are his children. Therefore, since we are God's children, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by human design and skill. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising Jesus the Messiah from the dead. When they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them sneered, but others said, "We want to hear you again on this subject." After that, Paul left. Some of the people became followers of Paul and believed in Jesus. Among them was Dionysius, a member of the Areopagus, also a woman called Damaris, and a number of others. After this, Paul left Athens and went to a city called Corinth. There, he met a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because the Emperor Claudius had ordered all Jews to leave Rome. Paul went to see them, and because Paul himself was a tent maker as they were, he stayed and worked with them. Every Sabbath, he reasoned in the synagogue, trying to persuade Jews and Greeks. When Silas and Timothy came from Macedonia, Paul devoted himself exclusively to preaching, testifying to the Jews that Jesus was the Messiah. But when some of the people in the synagogue opposed Paul and became abusive, he shook out his clothes in protest and said to them, "Your blood be on your own heads. I am innocent of it. From now on, I will go to the Gentiles." Then Paul left the synagogue and went next door to the house of Titius Justus, a worshiper of God who was a Gentile, not a Jew. And this is what he always did. Remember, he first goes to a synagogue and tries to share the good news about Jesus with the people in the synagogue. And then, if he gets rejected, he goes to the Gentiles. However, Crispus, an official of the synagogue, and his entire household believed in the Lord. And many of the Corinthians who heard Paul believed and were baptized. One night, the Lord spoke to Paul in a vision. He said, "Do not be afraid, Paul. Keep on speaking. Do not be silent, for I am with you, and no one is going to attack and harm you, because I have many people in this city." So Paul stayed in Corinth for 1.5 years, teaching them the word of the Lord. Then the Jews of Corinth who did not believe in Jesus made a united attack on Paul and brought him in front of the Roman proconsul, Gallio. "This man," they charged, "is persuading the people to worship God in ways contrary to the law." Just as Paul was about to speak, Gallio said to them, "If you Jews were making a complaint about some misdemeanor or serious crime, it would be reasonable for me to listen to you. But since it involves questions about words and names in your own law, settle the matter yourselves. I will not be a judge of such things." So he drove them off. Then the crowd now turned on another synagogue leader named Sosthenes and beat him in front of the proconsul, and Gallio showed no concern whatsoever. And Paul then stayed on in Corinth for some time. Finally, Paul left the brothers and sisters and, accompanied by Priscilla and Aquila, sailed to Ephesus. Paul himself went into the synagogue in Ephesus and reasoned with the Jews. And when they asked him to spend more time with them, he declined. But as he left, he promised, "I will come back if it is God's will." Then he set sail, but left behind Priscilla and Aquila. When Paul landed, he went up to Jerusalem and greeted the church, and then went back north to Antioch. And that was the end of Paul's second missionary journey. But that's not the end of Paul's trips. Look for Bible Shorts episode 123. Paul goes back to Ephesus.